All right, we're starting a new Masechta this week, Bava Batra.
Bava Batra.
Yeah, the last gate. So,
Amud Aleph Chet.
yeah, this week what we're going to be discussing, I skipped the more politically contentious Gemaras about this idea that's developed in the Amud before today's Shiur, about the question of, let's say, the beginning of Bava Batra is all about, laws with different neighbors and how they kind of live together in the different dinei and mamonot. And one of the questions that come up is in terms of communal funds. So you need to collect taxes or collect funds from various people. So how does that work? And who needs to pay and who doesn't? And one of the questions, there's several instances brought up about certain projects that were done where they tried to collect money from the rabbis who lived in the city, and then the rabbis protested and said, Rabbanan lo tzriche netiruta, right? The rabbis don't need protection. So, for example, if you're building a wall around the city, so the rabbis shouldn't have to pay for that wall because their Torah protects them. They don't need protection from the wall itself.
Torah magna u'matzah.
Torah magna u'matzah. B'diuk. Okay, so the Gemara talks about that, and there's discussions about it. And then right after that, there's a discussion about whether Torah scholars, Rabbanan, should get other benefits based on the fact that they are holding in Torah. And we'll deal specifically with two questions. One question is, are you allowed to benefit from your Torah? Right? If you're a knowledgeable Torah scholar, that's something you're allowed to use for your own benefit. And the other question we're going to ask is, how should we relate to people who don't know Torah as well? I'm a ratzin, right? How are we supposed to relate to people like that? Okay, so we'll learn the story here. It's a story about Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. It might remind us of a story that we learned actually a couple of months ago in Bava Batra about Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. There are some parallels to one of the stories there. And we'll go based on that and learn the different mefarshim as we tend to do. Okay, so the Gemara in Bava Batra, please use it. The Gemara in Bava Batra and Daf Chen Amud Aleph says as follows. Rabbi patach otzarot b'shnei vatzoret. Okay, so once it was a famine, and Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, right, who was in charge, so he opened up the storehouses during a famine to feed the people. Amar yikansu balei mikra, balei mishnah, balei talmud, balei halacha, balei agada, aval amei haaretz al yikansu. Right, if you know Torah or Mishnah or Gemara or Halacha or Agada, you're allowed to come get food during this famine. But if you're an Am Haaretz, you're not allowed to come get food. Tachak Rabbi Yonatan ben Amram v'nichnas. So Rabbi Yonatan ben Amram pushed his way through the crowd and entered. Amar lo, Rabbi Parnaseni, he said to Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, sustain me, give me something to eat. So Amar lo b'ni karita. So Rabbi Yehuda Nasi said to him, do you know any Torah? Amar lo lav. He said to him, no. We'll see shortly that he's not telling the truth. He did know, but he said, no, I don't. Shanita, do you know any Mishnah? Amar lo lav. He says, I don't. So im ken b'mal farnesecha. So Rabbi Yehuda Nasi says to him, so why should I give you?
Oh, I know this story.
Okay. So Amar lo, he said back to him, Parneseni kechelev ucheorev. Sustain me as though you were to sustain, the way you would sustain a dog or a raven. Okay? We'll see the different mefarshim what that means. Parnaseh. So Rabbi Yehuda Nasi has mercy on him and sustains him. He gives him food. But Tardin Pak, then this rabbi left, Rabbi Yonatan ben Amram. Yatev Rabbi became mitzvah, and then Rabbi regretted his decision. Amar, Oy li shenatati piti la ma'aretz. Woe is me that I ended up feeding, giving my bread to an Am Haaretz. Okay, Amar lefanav Rabbi Shimon bar Rabbi. Right, so his son, Rabbi Shimon, said to him, Shema Yonatan ben Amram talmidcha hu she'eno rotze le'anot mikvod haTorah miyamav. So somehow his son knew who this was, and his son said to him, maybe he was pretending to be an Am Haaretz, but really he was one of your students, Yonatan ben Amram. And the reason he lied and said he didn't know any Torah was because he didn't want to get any benefit from the fact that he knew Torah, and if he went and he got food because he told you he was a Torah scholar, he'd be benefiting from his Torah. But Ashkach, so they investigated and found that was in fact the case. Amar Rabbi yikansu akol. So Rabbi Yehuda Nasi then annulled his original decree and said everybody's allowed to come in. Okay, well, we'll ask at the end, is he saying yikansu akol because of the technical problem of he'll never know if a Torah scholar is being modest and trying to sneak in and he wants to sustain Torah scholars, so just from a technical standpoint he has to let everyone in, but really he doesn't want to? Or is this a broader kind of ideological yikansu akol that he realizes that what he did was maybe not necessarily the right way to approach it? Okay. Then the Gemara continues. Rabbi L'tameh. So he is consistent. Dama Rabbi Ein pורענות ba'al לעולם, אלא בשביל הארץ. The only reason there's suffering or evil in the world is because of amaratzim, right? Ke'ahud, and this is a great story. Ke'ahud demei chlila d'shtio Tveria. Once there was a head tax, like a tax that was placed on the inhabitants of Tveria. Atu lekame de Rebbe v'amaru le'leitu rabbanan b'hadan. So the residents of Tveria had to pay this tax, and so they went to Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, who lived there, and said to him, the rabbi should also pay the tax. You guys live in Tveria. There's a tax that the government is imposing on us, so everyone should pay, including the rabbis. Amar lehu la. So he said to them, no, we're not going to pay. Amrule arukinan. So they said to him, we're going to leave. We're not going to stay here and pay a tax and also support the rabbis who are evading paying the tax. Amar lehu aroku. So Rabbi Nasi said to them, okay, bye, you should leave. Aroku palgeon. So half of them left. Right, Daliyuhe palgas. So then the tax was placed on the remaining half of the residents, and they had to pay that tax. So what happens? So this second half now comes to Rabbi Nasi. They said to him, so they said, okay, now surely you have to participate in the payment of the tax, right? You have to help us. Amarlu, he said to them, no. Arokinan, we're going to leave. Aroku, he says, okay, leave. Araku kulhu, so they all left. Pash hahu kovis. There was only one launderer left in the whole city of Tveria. Kashadyoya kovis. So the government placed the entire tax for the city of Tveria on this one launderer. Okay, ara kovis. So the launderer left. Pka klila, and the government annulled the tax. Ama Rebbe said, Ra'item, didn't I tell you? She'en pורענות ba'al לעולם, אלא בשביל הארץ. The only reason they're suffering in the world is because of amaratzim. Great story. Okay, we're not going to discuss the current ramifications, but obviously there's what to see from the story. I want to focus actually more on the first half. In particular, we're going to start by trying to understand this phrase of Rabbi Yonatan ben Amram, where he says, "Parneseni kechelev ucheorev." He says, "Sustain me like a dog and a raven." What does he mean by that? Okay, so all the Mefarshim have something to say. So Rashi says the following: Shechas HaKadosh Baruch Hu alehem. They're animals that Hashem has mercy on. Shneimar yodei tzadik din dalim. They're considered dalim, downtrodden animals. Lefisha kelev mezonotav muatin. Right, dogs, it's hard for them to find food. Lefichach shoheh hachilato b'me'av shloshet yamim. This is a Gemara in Masechet Shabbat. Basically, dogs, the reason why they were created with their being able to sustain. On a meal, they can sustain themselves for 3 days. The food lingers in their stomachs. That was God having mercy on them because it's not easy for them to find food as opposed to cats who can find food like any garbage dumpster. When it comes to a raven, and so the children of the raven are suffer because the parent is cruel to the children of the raven. So Rashi says Hashem makes it so that the tzoah, the droppings of the parent has flies in it, and then the baby ravens eat from that. The idea being that is just as Hashem has mercy on these misken, downtrodden animals, so have mercy on me, even though I don't know Torah and Mishnah, and even though I'm an Aretz, right, have mercy on me, even though I don't necessarily deserve it. Okay, so that's how Rashi understands it. It's also, I think, the pshat of the Gemara. Tosfot adds, "Kmo shepir shekuntrus, v'aynu d'chtiv noten leve'ema lachma livnei orev sheyikrau." Right, this is a pasuk from Tehillim. So Tosfot says, "Be'ema begematria kelev." Okay, so then when we read it, it says, "Noten lakelev lochma livnei orev sheyikrau." So you have here the kelev and the orev. Okay, so it's a little gematria there. Okay, the Maharsha has a different approach, and his interpretation is based on the Gemara in Sanhedrin. Right? And I think we must have learned this in the past at some point. There's this famous idea that when Noach and all the animals went onto the ark, so they were ne'asru b'tashmish hamita, right? They weren't allowed to have relations with one another. The idea is that when the whole world is suffering and going through a churban, it's appropriate for you to also go through some personal level of suffering. Okay? So the Gemara in Sanhedrin Kuf Chet Amud Bet asks, how do we know that they were not allowed to have intercourse on the ark? Right, come onto the ark, you and your sons and your wife and your sons' wives. So the men are listed together and then the women. Right? Uchtiv, tzeh min hateva, ata v'ishtecha u'v'nachon shevenach itach. But when they're told to leave the ark, so it's Noach and his wife, and the sons and their wives. And the husbands and the wives are paired together. That's how you know that when they went on the ark, they weren't allowed to be together, and then when they left, they were again allowed to be together and to repopulate the world. Okay? And then the Gemara continues, Tanur Banan, Shlosha Shimshu Bateva. There were 3 who violated this prohibition and did have relations on the ark. V'chulam laku, and all of them were struck in punishment because of it. Kelev, Ve'orev, V'cham. Okay, the dog, the raven, and Cham, the son of Noach. Kelev Nikshar, how was the dog punished? That ever after he's bound by a leash, he's domesticated. That was his punishment for the way he acted on the ark. Orev Rak. Sorry?
What did he do?
That he continued to be with the female, the Ima dog, even though they were supposed to take a break from each other, because the whole world was going through a flood at the time. Okay? The raven, Rak, it used to spit. That was its punishment, that it was disgusting. And Cham, Laka Beoro, right? And Cham had dark skin, that was his punishment, because he was the descendant of the people in Africa. So that's the Gemara in Sanhedrin. Okay, so the Maharsha notes that who are the 2 animals here that are mentioned are the Kelev and the Orev. And he says as follows. V'amar le, in our Gemara, his commentary, V'amar le parneseni ke'orev u'chechelev. That you should sustain me as though I were a raven or a dog. Nakat elu, why specifically these? Shigam b'teva hayu kulam asurim l'shamesh. Right, on the ark, everybody was forbidden from being together. Mitam zeh she'olam haya shurur b'tzar. Right, the whole world was suffering, you have to suffer also. V'arev v'akelev lo tzaru atzman, but they didn't listen. V'shimshu mitotan, and they were still together with their partners. Kedamrina b'perek chelek, as it says in Sanhedrin, just so. V'af al pichen parnesan Noach. In other words, even though these animals did not listen, they were sinners, right? They didn't listen to the prohibition shenesru b'tashmish hamita on the ark. Noach didn't say to them, "Oh, you guys are still doing this, even though you're not allowed to. Therefore, I'm not going to give you any food." He still fed them on the ark. Right? Gamata al tachosh lezeh u'tefarneseni. So Rabbi Yonatan ben Amram is hinting to Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, even though these 2 animals were the amaratzim of the teva, in the sense that they went and they did things that they weren't supposed to do, and they didn't listen to the prohibition, but they were still sustained by Noach. So too, you should also sustain me, even though I'm an amaretz. Okay?
Feeding the whole purpose of what he's doing there, essentially. So with his queen thing, like, I really know what I'm talking about. You should sustain me, but he's making a show of it.
You're saying the Maharsha's pshat would imply that he's trying to do some drasha that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi would be able to pick up on and discover him.
He's not an Amaretz.
What?
Right, he's skipping away. There's not an Amaretz, so it's like the thing. The whole purpose there is.
Or he's doing that, or he's not, or it was just his own little shtick. I don't know, but yes, I mean clearly Rabbi Yehuda Nasi did not understand it because he ends up feeding him and not knowing who he was. But I hear what you're saying, right?
It's not such a great riot in terms of on the ark. You didn't even have a choice. Like it was, if you didn't feed them, then that species is extinct, right?
Right. I thought that as well. Right. I thought that as well. That he had to feed them, otherwise they would go extinct. What?
Noach was not a judge on the ark.
Right. He had to feed them to keep the species alive. Right. Yeah. Fair enough. I thought that as well. Especially because they were the Tmeim, so there were only 2 of them. They weren't like that. Maybe the Torah you could let some of them die and the rest of them.
Well, so you could argue that if that's a question, then this is the answer. It wasn't that he was saying it's a proof. He was letting on that he's really not Amaretz. He knew all this stuff, so that was the hint. That
I didn't say it again. I didn't follow that.
His question could be the answer. If you ask why you have him proving the ark, they weren't. Like, they didn't have a choice. You couldn't let them go extinct.
Right.
The answer is that him giving this whole drosha, showing that he's not really an Amaretz.
He's pointing out that Rabbi Yehuda is not the judge.
Right. Okay. Oh, you're saying on the Maharsha, you could go even further.
Yeah.
That he's actually critiquing Rabbi Yehuda Nasi as part of this. Just like Noach didn't really have a choice. Who are you to decide who gets the food and who doesn't? Huh? Very good.
Interesting, because you had Rabbi Akiva, where his father-in-law goes by the name Kalba Savua, by the way, if we're already bringing that one into the mix. and he refused to give him anything.
Right.
Before he went on his, learning spree. So you would think, but again, and his name implies that even the dog who comes to him would leave in a full stomach.
Right.
Just
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, and then the Maharsha continues and just says umicham. So what about the third person in the group of three? That Cham also was mishamesh. So why doesn't he say parneseni kekelev ucheorev ukecham? So first of all, that would probably give away that this is the drasha that he was making, right? If he also referenced Cham ben Noach. But aside from that, the Maharsha says shigamu shimesh b'teva shelo hevi lo raya she'efshar shu parnas atzmo. Right? Cham didn't need Noach to feed him; he went and he fed himself. In other words, of course the father is going to feed his son. He's not going to let his son starve. So you can't learn a proof from there, but you can learn it from the dog and the raven. Okay. I like the chidush that you guys made about it's also a critique of Rabbi Dana Sipra.
That was kind of my question, because you can say, if he has to say that Hasabano implies that he would, in theory, have been willing to cut out the species if he felt it was bad enough a transgression.
Right. Fair enough. Yeah. But again, if it wasn't necessarily up to him, then it doesn't matter. I guess, yeah.
But he's making it sound like it was, meaning
right.
harming a raya from his son because he would have given his son anyway, implying that if he felt it was egregious enough, he would have.
Okay. Yeah. All right. The Yun Yaakov gives a third explanation for this parneseim kechelev ucheorev. So he says on the top of the next page, 6 or 7 lines down, parneseni. Okay. Ayin pi Rashi v'Maharsha, which we saw. V'od yesh lomar. Right, that perhaps it's a common practice or the way of the world is to be cruel to these animals. Right, that you hit the dog in order to train it. You don't want the dog to kind of be comfortable near you. Talking about stray dogs, right? You want to make sure that they know that they can't become too close to you. Right? What was Rebbe's rationale according to Yun Yaakov? That what was motivating him is he doesn't want the Haaretz now to become comfortable coming all the time and schnoring off him, right? It's okay. So if you give an Haaretz an inch, she takes a mile in the sense that you need to have a clear rule in place. But then he continues. So he says, but the dog, even though you keep the dog at a distance and you beat him, but you still feed a dog if it needs food. In other words, you don't want him to be, I guess talking about a wild dog here, but you don't want him to be your best friend, but you still need to sustain a dog, right? You're not going to tell it to go. You're not going to let it go starve. So similarly, I understand you don't want me to come, be a schnorr by your, all the time with you, but you can still sustain me. וכן העורב שהוא אכזר על בניו, אפילו וכל מי שאינו רחם על אחרים אין מרחמים עליו, אפילו אחים מפרנסים אותו. Right? Or like a raven who doesn't even have mercy on his own children, but still you have mercy on a raven. Right? You'll still feed a raven who comes to you. So too have mercy on me. או יש לומר, דלכך כמה כעורב, דלא תאמר דלכך מפרנסים הכלב, כפי שאין להם פרנסה זה מזה, שהכלבים שונאים זה את זה. So apparently the Gemara says, right, dogs don't like each other. They won't give each other food. If there's 2 dogs and there's one of them has food and the other one needs food, that he won't feed him. So you might say, okay, therefore, if the Amaratzim themselves, so that I can't learn from the Kelev to the Amaratzim. Why not? Because because Amaratzim like each other. So if an Amaretz needs food, he would give his fellow Amaretz food. יכולים להתפרנס זה מזה. כמה, וכעורבים, כי העורבים אוהבים זה את זה. כדאית השם בפסחים, אפילו אנחנו מפרנסים אותם. But the ravens, I was trying to explain why I say the dog and the raven. So I need the raven to teach me even because they love each other, but still you support them. Okay. The Ben Yoyada has a nice chap where he wants to be medayek on the fact that Rabbi Dan Nasi said, Oili shenatati piti la'am haaretz. Right, woe is me that I gave my bread to this Am Haaretz. So the Ben Yoyada says, Kasha, velo b'tchila hiskim shelo lefarneso, b'shvil shu amaretz. In the beginning he said, I'm not going to sustain him because he's an amaretz. V'achar shamar lo parnesein kechelev v'parneseni ke'orev, hiskim lefarneso v'farneso. But then when Rabbi Yochanan ben Torta said, Yonatan ben Amram, said, feed me, so then he agreed. Ve'la'ama le'achar sheparneso yatzav chazor bo v'amar oi. So you get going back and forth, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. So what's going on? So the Ben Yehuda says, "V'nira li lo nitcharet al asher parneso." He didn't regret his decision to feed him when he says, "Oili shenatati piti la'aretz." Ela nitcharet al asher natan lo hapat ve'alach lo, ki amar kevan shu ha'aretz v'aday yochal belo netilat yadayim uvelo bracha. והיה צריך שלא ייתן לו הפת וילך, אלא יאכילהו בפת בביתו, כדי שייטול ידיו ויברך בפניו. In other words, it's oily shenatati pitila ma'aretz, that he's not upset that he fed him, he's upset that he gave him the bread, that he's like, lifnei iver almost, that he should have like told him, okay, and now come eat with me, and now make sure that he eats it properly. Okay, v'lezeh amar oy shenatati pitila ma'aretz, natati daika. Kelomar natati lo v'lo echiltiv. I gave it to him and sent him off instead of feeding him the way I should have. Beveti. Et apat, el natativ lo, v'ideka acholichu imo leveto. Inami amar oy shenatati piti. Or you could be medayik on the fact that it's bread. Maybe he's saying, I should have given him something else to eat instead of bread. Or I should have just given him money. Because now I'm giving, again, the I gave him the bread. This is a nice diuk of the Ben Yehuda. What? It's a good chap, yeah. It's not pshat, it's a good chap. Okay. Now I want to kind of conclude with the last few sources, asking more kind of the fundamental question of really what's at stake in the discussion between Rabbi Yehuda Nasi and Rabbi Yonatan ben Amram is the question of, are you allowed to benefit from the fact that you're a Torah scholar? Right? That Rabbi Yehuda Nasi sets up this system initially that almost requires a Torah scholar to benefit from his Torah. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Amram seems to be trying to suggest that that's not necessarily the right thing to do. Do we have other sources for this concept? So the answer is yes. We'll start here with this story that's told in Calamity, and it appears in other places in Chazal as well. Maseh beRabbi Tarfon, shaya ochel ktziot mipardes shelo. So Rabbi Tarfon had a field, and he was eating some of the food from his field. He had a sharecropper who was in charge of taking care of the field, and the sharecropper found him and didn't know that it was him. So the sharecropper thought he was a thief coming to just steal the thing. So he started beating Rabbi Tarfon. Rabbi Tarfon did not utter a word. He took the beating silently. And when it was to the point where Rabbi Tarfon was at death's door, what? The brink of death. Amar oy lecha Rabbi Tarfon. So he says, "Woe to you, Rabbi Tarfon." In the third, right, like referencing externally. So Amar le. So the sharecropper stopped, beating him to death and said, "Ata Rabbi Tarfon, are you Rabbi Tarfon?" Amar lo hein. So he said, "Yes." Amad v'talash b'saro v'tzaku bacha. So the sharecropper, when he realized, what he had done, that he was beating Rabbi Tarfon himself, so then he was very upset. In other words, he thought he was protecting the field. But what do we see from this story? V'kol kach lama li, v'kol kach lama. In other words, why did Rabbi Tarfon let himself get to the point of being, to the point where his soul almost left his body before he protested? Kedei shelo yishtamesh bekavod haTorah, right? Because he said, if I say I'm Rabbi Tarfon, so I'm benefiting from my reputation as a Torah scholar. And that's not allowed. So to the point where it was only at the point where it was really pikuach nefesh that he even said anything.
The guy had no qualms speaking to death, the guy who wasn't Rabbi Tarfon.
It's a different topic.
It's a little weird. He's saying, why was that using Kidrash and Torah? It's just saying, I'm
Rabbi Tarfon.
Okay, this is mine. No, isn't that what the story is?
So one of the commentaries mentions that it could be that he said that it could be just that I'm rich and I'm the owner of the field. Why are you assuming it's the Kavod Torah? But it's a good question.
By the way, another point of the matter is when the Midrash speaks of when Moshe sees the end of Rabbi Akiva and he asks, "Zot Torah v'zot schara." So you would think.
Okay.
You would think that there is some kind of one at least shouldn't die or won't end his life in an unsavory way, you would think.
Right.
So maybe.
Yeah. Yeah.
So should there be some kind of, at least at your end, so to speak? I don't know, because you can look at it also from that end and say, okay, at least you shouldn't go out. You should go out with an honor, at least.
Yeah.
Because
like he didn't want to invoke it, but then when he's about to die, he has to. There's no choice.
Right.
For covenant then. Things that make Torah should continue being learned then.
Right. There are a lot of different teaching. Again, there are there's a difference, first of all, between like actively pursuing honor because of your Torah and being given it or using it to protect yourself, to prevent harm. Those are, I wouldn't say those are the same thing, right? But yes, these are all kind of good points. I just want to continue in the interest of time. So, מכאן אמרו חכמים, כל המשתמש בכתרה של תורה, אין לו חלק לעולם הבא. Okay, so here explicitly, notwithstanding Aviezer's point, the Chachamim learned from this story that whoever uses the Keter of Torah does not have a place in Olam Haba. So this is even more extreme, because you would say maybe even Rabbi Tarfon should have let himself be killed, because he's forfeiting his place in Olam Haba for the sake of continuing in Olam Hazeh. Anyways, the Gemara in Avot, the Mishnah in Avot has a similar point. Rabbi Tzadok Omer, Al ta'aseh matara litgadel behem, don't make the words of Torah a crown to glorify yourself with them. V'lo kardom lachfor behem, and not an axe to dig with. V'chachai Hillel Omer, d'ishtamesh b'tag hachalaf. Anyone who uses the crown for his own benefit will pass away from the world. Right? It's a negative kind of thing. Whoever benefits from words of Torah, his life will be taken from him in this world. Rabbeinu Yonah ties these two together in his commentary here, where he kind of says the story with Rabbi Tzadok. Rabbi Tzadok, we'll read inside quickly. So when it says whoever benefits from words of Torah loses his place in this world, it doesn't just mean benefit in the monetary sense. Oh, you shouldn't accept money because you're such a big chacham. Right? You shouldn't even save yourself defensively with Torah. Here it's a slightly different version of the story, where they bound him up to throw him into the river, because they thought he was a robber. כיוון שהכיר בו שהוא בטרפון נחי וברך, כל ימיו שאותו צדיק היה מצטער הדבר הזה, ואמר, אוי לי שנשתמשתי בקדושה של תורה, שכל המשתמש בה אין לו חלק גם הבא. Here we actually have an appendix to the story where Tarfon afterwards was upset that he actually saved himself with Torah.
Maybe the story, I know it doesn't fit in, but in the Calamity, he says, אתה הוא רבי טרפון אמר לו הן, then רבי טרפון עמד ותלש בצערו וצעק ובכה.
Very good. That's a good read. That's a good chiddush.
Calamity is like a Gemara.
No, it's Mishnayot, but it's Masechtot Ktanot. Yeah, Masechtot Ktanot. The Calamity, Derech Eretz, Masechet Sofrim. There's a few Masechtot Ktanot. Yeah, it's from the time of the Tanaim. But that's very sharp. I like that. That's a good read. So that ties it to the version of it. I have to find out the version of Rabbeinu Yonah quotes and see, because he's quoting from somewhere, right? Very good.
It might be the same. The question is where the commas or who he is.
No, I mean Rabbeinu Yonah's version. He says "Oili shenishtamashti b'kitra shel Torah." That's clearly Rabbi Tarfon talking. The version in Calamity, it's unclear who it's talking about. If it's him or the guy who almost beat him to death. Very good. Okay, I just want to conclude, to go back with the question that I said, I kind of hinted to at the beginning, which is when Rabbi Yehuda Nasi said at the end, okay, everybody can come in. Was he saying that because now anytime I want to feed someone, I don't know if they're a Torah scholar. Anytime I want to feed an Am Haaretz, anytime an Am Haaretz comes, I don't know if they're a real Am Haaretz or a Torah scholar pretending to be an Am Haaretz because they don't want to get a benefit. Since I have no way to differentiate, so therefore I just have to let everyone in. Is it logistical? Or is it that he received the Musar from Rabbi Yonatan ben Amram in some sense and changed his policy, right? So I want to argue that those two readings are actually machloket amongst the Rishonim and Achronim. So the Yad Rama in his commentary on Bava Batra, he says as follows. So first of all, how do we paskin? Right? Like, are you supposed to not feed an Am Haaretz, like Rabbi Yehuda Nasi says? So l'inyan hilchata, filu biyadua shu Am Haaretz chayav lefarnaso. Right? Even if you know someone is a total ignoramus, you still have to, give them food if they ask for it. The be'edyatnam besof horiyot mamzer tamid chacham kodem lekohen gadol Am Haaretz mekademu dekadim aika shakil. So even though we say that an Am Haaretz that's a Kohen Gadol is not as great as a Mamzer Tamid Chacham, but still the Am Haaretz still has some value. It's not that he's worth nothing that you can ignore. Surely he's not worse than a non-Jew. And here, even though it's a technical reason, you still have to feed the Goyim, the poor of the Goyim, for the sake of peace with the government. So surely then I should have to feed also the Aniyeh of Yisrael, even if they're Amaratzim. Okay, which I think means something along the lines of, it's an analogy of a grapevine, how the leaves are the Amaratzim because they protect the clusters of the grapes, or the Torah scholars. So also appreciate the leaves because they protect the clusters. In other words, there's value in the Amaratzim as well. ודווקא באמרת שאינו לא במקרא ולא במשנה, אלא שישנו בדרך ארץ ובמצוות. אבל, היכא דידוע דלייתא בדרך ארץ ולא במצוות, אסור לפרנסו כל עיקר. So, the other Rama says, this is true if he doesn't have Torah knowledge, but he's, like a menschlichter guy. He's still a decent person who follows the Torah mitzvah the best he can. He just doesn't know Torah, so you have to feed him. He's still a good Jew. But if he's someone who's, like a Rasha, so then you don't have to feed him. Ama lo bardatu, וגרסינו בפרק חלק, אמר בלעזר, כל מי שאין בו דעה, אסור לרחם עליו. שנאמר, כי לא עם בינות הוא, על כן לא ירחמנו עשהו, וגרסינו נמי יתן, אבל נותן פת למי שאין בו דעה, ייסורן בהן עליו. שנאמר לחמך ישימו מוזר, ותחתך עליהם תבונה בו. That Rabbi Elazar had a very strong opinion of helping people who are not bar de'ah. What does it mean bar de'ah? So, the Rama argues it's somebody who doesn't have Mikra, Mishnah, or Derech Eretz. Okay, but the point being that I would argue what he seems to be saying is we have to feed the Amei Haaretz, but it's not from a place of love and kiruv and rachamim, right? It's from a place of they're not worse than a goy, right? So you have to feed them because you have to feed them, but it's kind of a negative, almost it's your hands are tied type of. That's the impression I get from the other Rama. In contrast, the Ad Yosef, and this will conclude. In his commentary, he says Ot Bet, which is 4 lines down. If you can see, there's the Bet there in between Ula and Af. So Af, shenitzta'er, shiten pitola Am Haaretz, kedei lakaman. Even though Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was upset that he gave his bread to an Am Haaretz, mikol makom, yechmeru rachamav alav. His mercy was around in that moment, and he still fed him. וזה כי אין אמת, שצריך האדם לבקש לתת צדקתו להגונים, צדקתו להגונים, ולא לבלתי הגונים. So he says, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi wasn't totally wrong in his intention, in the sense that you're supposed to try, if you have tzedakah, you should try to give your tzedakah to the people who are the most worthy of it. It's better to give tzedakah to a Torah scholar than to an Am Haaretz, for the sake of this example. And that is a worthy thing to do. Aval lo sheba'avur ze yitachzer, but that shouldn't turn you into someone who's cruel and unforgiving. Im yavo etzlo, right? If someone who's not a Torah scholar comes to you, mishu mutzrach, but he really needs the food. We see that he's someone who wanders around begging for bread. That it's good to have an intent to give. I want to give my tzedakah to the most, the biggest Talmidei Chachamim, or to the most righteous people, and that's a good intent to have. But not to the extent that you're going to withhold your money from someone who desperately needs it, even if they're an Am Haaretz. Right? You're going to cause him to die from famine. Just because he doesn't know Torah. And then I think, to me, this is the key line here. We have a mitzvah to be imitatio Dei, or to be similar to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hanoten lechem l'kol basar layodim l'vilti yodim. Hashem gives food to everybody, whether they're deserving or not. And so you need to be mahu rachum atarachum. So even if you have like a technical kind of reason to say I shouldn't give the Amaratzim, but where's your compassion and your humanity in the story? I'd argue that comes through more in the Ad Yosef's interpretation of Rabbi Yehuda Nassi's eventual lesson being learned, as opposed to the Yad Ramah. So just to conclude, this should remind us of what we learned a few weeks ago in Bava Batra, by the way, about the Rabbi Yehuda Nassi. If you remember that there was a cow who was going to be slaughtered, and the cow rubbed up against him and said, "Save me." And Rabbi Yehuda Nassi said, "Zil chach notzarta," right? Go. Your purpose is to be slaughtered. And then he was punished for that with 13 years of tooth pain, until eventually his handmaiden, we saw different versions of the Midrash, his handmaiden was like hitting some rats, and he said, "V'rachamav kol masav," leave them alone. In other words, Rabbi Yehuda Nassi learned his lesson, but you have to be compassionate. Not everybody's a gadol ador and a nasi with incredible yichus and incredible, right? But we see Rabbi Yehuda Nassi there learned his lesson explicitly. Perhaps here, when he says yikansu hakol, the Yad Yosef, I would argue, is maybe trying to teach some idea that Rabbi Yonatan ben Amram, his student, actually taught him to be a little bit more compassionate about people who are on Ratzin.
Oh, you have also the famous blessing that Rabbi Shmuel Kohen Gadol gave Hashem.